Okay, let's see if this works. As usual, it's always chaos. Okay, so if you guys can see and hear me okay, just add something to the chat box and let me know that everything's okay. I'm testing out some new settings right now, so hopefully things go a little bit more clear than they have been in the past. So hopefully you guys can see this. Welcome to my live stream. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's Wine Wednesday. I haven't done one of these in a while, so I wanted to do a bit of a Q&A, and I'm just by myself today, but today's theme is going to be wildlife ethics. So I like to pick a theme for the live streams because it helps me kind of get my thoughts around one topic, but I still have taken a bunch of questions from YouTube just on my community tab. Okay, cool. All clear. It looks good. Awesome. I'm glad I'm slowly getting this down. So I have a bunch of non-wildlife ethics related questions, and that's totally fine. And so if you also have any questions, we're going to just use the chat box you can see on YouTube right there to drop your question. I don't know if I'm going to get to all of them. Depends how many people are watching this stream, but I'm going to answer as many as I can. So hopefully you can take this time to ask some of the questions that you've been wondering about. I'm sorry if you are a frequent patron of my Wine Wednesdays. You know that I don't always have wine on hand. So today we are drinking Tofino Brewing Company Blonde Ale. So this is a beer Wednesday, so please forgive me. I've been trying to limit the amount of grocery store shopping I've been doing since everyone is sick right now. Hey guys, how are you doing? Excited to be at your first Wine Wednesday. Welcome, welcome. All right, let me have my first sip and then I'll start off by answering a question from the YouTube community tab. So those of you guys who asked your questions on there, I'll grab one from there and then keep asking them in the question box. Okay, hopefully everyone is doing well today. Okay, so I really wish I had a beer. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to pick a good one to start off with to get our wildlife ethics topic going. Oh, I have a lot of questions on stuff like zoos and like veganism and hunting, and those are all questions that I tend to avoid on my channel because they are so personal, and I really don't have any desire to get a bunch of YouTube comments of people that disagree with me because I already get a lot of that, and I just kind of have been avoiding the topics. So maybe we can answer one of those ones first. So let's talk about, should we start with zoos? I feel like that's starting off dramatic, but so this is what someone's asking. As a vegan yourself, what are your thoughts on zoos? And so I have answered that in comments, but not in a video itself. So this one is absolutely a personal value, and it doesn't necessarily reflect a purely scientific viewpoint, but I personally don't support zoos monetarily. Like, I don't go to zoos, specifically because I'm not a fan of seeing captive animals. That said, I think we need to talk about the difference between a zoo and a sanctuary. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're used interchangeably, as in some people have zoos and they call them sanctuaries. And sometimes sanctuaries can be called zoos, but all of their animals are rescue animals. If they are rescue animals and they haven't been taken from the wild and from their natural habitats, I am all for that. In an ethical way. So I've worked at sanctuaries myself from animals that were rescued, and the contact with humans is absolutely limited to only the essentials. Like, if you have to interact with that animal, then, or the animal comes up to you, or so on and so forth, but no public interaction. I guess the exception to that being when I worked with wolf dogs, there was some public interaction because they were part dog. So there's a huge spectrum of ethicalness in zoos and sanctuaries. So like one end of that being roadside zoos, which are absolutely horrible. And I think most people would agree, seeing a tiger in a tiny cage, literally, with people like poking at it, that's absolutely horrible and unethical. With the all far other side of the spectrum being like a farm sanctuary where contact is only limited, or I guess farm sanctuary isn't a good example. Let's stick with wildlife. A wildlife sanctuary where contact's only limited to the handlers and everyone is rescued and they're doing great things. And there's a whole lot of zoos in the middle. And without having worked at a specific zoo, it's hard to know the true extent of how ethical they are. So I just choose not to support that unless, I'm exceedingly comfortable with knowing the ethics of that organization. That's my personal choice, and I'm not judging anyone who does find a lot of inspiration in zoos, but I personally do not enjoy seeing captive animals. It's really sad to me. Cool. I'm actually not getting anything in the chat box, so hopefully it's still working. So if anyone has any comments, add them to the chat box. And can someone also just add a comment in saying, making sure it's working? What do you think about the argument that zoos take money from conservation? I've actually haven't really thought about that too much. I'm guessing you mean like if someone was going to donate to conservation, but instead they don't donate to a zoo organization. I think if they donate to like a rescue portion of the zoo organization, I guess I can see the argument for that. But if they're donating to a private zoo that primarily acts for human entertainment, that's pretty sad to me. I do think that it attracts a different crowd. Like the people who donate for conservation efforts tend to be a different crowd than people who like put all their money toward zoos. So I can definitely see that argument. Hopefully you guys who are watching this don't leave me any mean comments about my opinion. So that's what I personally think about zoos. Okay, cool. We've gotten that out of the way. There was another question along that lines relating to wildlife ethics, and that is thoughts on those going into the field of wildlife biology who decide not to go vegan/vegetarian. And that's another controversial one. I could probably make all these like as separate videos, but that's another one that's totally personal and one that I've avoided talking about. I have like debated making like a super clickbaity video that's like, can non-vegans be environmentalists? But I don't know, it just doesn't like feel right for my channel, and it doesn't seem to, I don't know. I want to like bring the topic up with like the highest amount of sensitivity. But I think absolutely you can be in this field without being vegan, vegetarian. Most people are not. I've said this before, but yeah, most wildlife biologists are not vegan. A lot of wildlife biologists are hunters. So a lot of people just seeing my channel seem to think that like most wildlife biologists don't eat meat. And I don't think that's true at all. I've actually never ran into another vegan wildlife biologist in real life. So you can totally do it. I just, as far as like going vegan and all that, I just think you should make the best choice for yourself, for the planet, and for the animals. With yourself, I guess, being the top priority there, but there are so many benefits to the planet and to the environment for going vegan, but not everyone's at different steps of their journey. Obviously, like I've eaten meat before. I think an aggressive approach would have turned me off at the time. So I think the best thing to do is just to think about what's right for your situation. Never be afraid to give things a try if you'd like to, and reach out to other people who have kind of gone through the experience before for support as far as like recipes, things they're running into with their family and stuff like that. But you can totally be a non-vegan environmentalist in the same way that I'm drinking beer out of a can right now that's not reusable, and I'm still an environmentalist. No one is perfect, and you shouldn't hold yourself to standards of perfection. Okay, cool. I'm getting some chats in here. I don't have an opinion, but I think that as children, zoos inspire them to work with the natural world, which ultimately leads to conservation sometimes. That's a huge argument for zoos. I would like kids to be able to be inspired by wildlife that are free, that have that freedom, but not everyone has those opportunities. Even in city parks, you can see like some pretty cool birds, but I guess it doesn't really, I don't have kids. I guess it's hard to get a kid inspired about seeing a crow in a park versus like a lion in a cage. So I think there are other ways to inspire kids, like bringing kids out in nature, that can also kind of run the same path without having to keep animals in captivity for it. I got a job at the zoo. They have taken me to do many conservation trips here in Texas, like whooping cranes and sea turtles, changed my career, help organizations like cheetah conservation. Yeah, there's a lot of wildlife biologists that work at zoos, and that's why I don't want to say that zoos aren't doing good, because they absolutely are doing a lot of good in the world. I just wish that animals did not have to be taken out of the wild and held captive for that good to happen. I guess that like encapsulates it the best. Are zoologists the ones who work with animals closely, such as working personally with a pack of wolves, or is that wildlife biology? So no, that would be both, really. Zoology and wildlife biology is quite similar, with the only kind of distinction being zoology tends to have a more focus on the individual animals, their anatomy, their physiology. This is generalizing, while wildlife biology focuses a little bit more on interactions with habitat and large-scale ecology issues. So they would both, depending on what you're studying, study like a pack of wolves. That doesn't necessarily mean working with animals like hands-on. Not a lot of wildlife biologists work hands-on with animals, but definitely in an observation and a fieldwork process. Okay, so someone's asking if my cat has a thunder shirt. Yes, he does. He went away, but he's having cat anxiety. He's like, it's this whole thing that no one cares about, but basically, yes, he does have a thunder shirt, and it helps him from pulling his fur out. So, and I'll answer the rest of your question, Intrepid CJ, after I answer Justin's, which is, how did you balance helping out your employer inside of the energy and construction industry and keeping the environment safe? That's a really good question, and that definitely ties in with ethics very closely. I think the biggest thing I'll start off with, the best characteristic you can have as a scientist is having integrity. That is absolutely huge. If you do not work with integrity as a scientist, you should leave the field, because it gives everyone else a bad name. And there are so many scientists out there in the oil and gas industry, in pipelines, in mining, forestry, that do not work with integrity. And they put more of a focus on pleasing their employer, the money, than helping the environment. So personally, I would never work directly for an energy company. I never have. I worked with consulting. So I was a specialist that took different contracts from all sorts of different people. I took a lot of oil and gas consulting contracts, and a lot of, I took some renewable stuff too. And I've strayed away from that now even. I just don't think I could go into that industry again. But when you have $50,000 of student loans and no job, and that's what's available, and that's the city that you live in, that's what you take. So I think it was really hard, and that's one of the reasons why I left that industry. But I never couldn't even dream of fudging any data to assist my employer, and my employers knew better than to ever insinuate that I need to do something to please the client that involves like compromising my scientific integrity. Where I live, biologists are managed by, okay, Tiger, give me 1 second. I'm going to let my cat out in a second, but let me finish my thought. There's a professional society that is regulating biologists in order to ensure they are working with integrity, and using like science evidence-based conclusions. And that is huge for kind of catching the non-ethical biologists. But yeah, it's hard to balance, but I didn't let anyone boss me around. It was always about the animals and always about the environment. Okay, Tiger, it's your turn to get let out. Hold on. Thanks, guys, for holding on. Okay. So, sorry the shadow is a little weird here. Let's adjust. Okay. Let me answer Yeah, traditional ecological knowledge all day. Absolutely. And that's actually kind of a good thing to bring up too, because that is huge in the oil and gas industry, midstream oil and gas and downstream pipelines. Right now, that's what it's all about. Um, is it common in the wildlife biology field for positive reinforcement techniques to be used if behavior is needing to be changed? I don't work with anything where we change the behavior of any wildlife. Yeah, I don't. I guess in sanctuaries you may do that. But absolutely, if there is any sort of like behavioral change needed in a sanctuary setting, which is quite rare, usually we just keep them safe and allow them to express themselves as animals. However, that is, we don't try to change their behavior too much. Anything would be a positive reinforcement. You look like Robin from How I Met Your Mother. I've heard that many, many times. What do you think about the coronavirus? Do you think it'll die down by summertime? I made a video about coronavirus and wildlife markets. Probably not. It'll probably be around all summer. We're preparing for it here. I mean, I'm not an expert on coronavirus at all. I'm not that. I don't know. I'm cautiously prepared. I'm not freaking out. But we did like get enough food to last us like a few weeks in case we have to get quarantined. At work right now, they're shutting down a lot of travel, so I'm probably not going to be doing any travel anytime soon. Where I live, there's a lot of like our main industry is like tourism and cruise ships and stuff because I live in like a vacation destination, and so this summer the cruise ships coming in is going to be absolutely insane, so I'm kind of prepared for the worst. Hopefully you guys are all staying safe where you are. I'm currently taking an environmental ethics course for my undergrad in conservation biology. One thing we have been going through is where we get our ethics from. How would you say you form your ethics? That's a really good question. Man, I got to think about that. Where do I get my ethics from? Oh, I think the way I think of it is why I'm here to begin with, and not losing sight of what you're trying to protect. So it's very easy and I'm going to talk about this because this might happen to you if you are wanting to become a wildlife biologist or an environmental scientist, is people will always push your boundaries. Like they will always try to see what they can get away with. You're lucky if that hasn't happened to you yet. But in this field, especially when a lot of things are about money, most of things in the world and working in a job are about money, it's very hard to respect the environment when people are trying to make money off of it. In some ways, you could see it as exploitation of the environment in any way. It's not ethical. There's just a lot of thoughts I have around that. But I have to remember why I'm here to begin with. It's to help the animals. It's not to make money. Like, don't go into wildlife biology if you're just trying to make a bunch of money, because you won't. But yeah, so I guess I would say my ethics come from my love for the animals and my respect for the animals themselves. Oh, the sun is hitting me in a really bad way. Let me try to fix this here. That's a really good question, and I'm kind of curious about if you have anything to say about that, like what your thoughts are. Okay, I can't fix the sun, so I'm just gonna look really sweaty for a little bit. Does that help? Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm not afraid of the virus for my own sake. I'm afraid of passing it on to someone else in my risk group. I know, that's the biggest thing. So just make sure you guys are washing your hands and not touching your face. As I touch my hands are washed, my hands are clean. Are you happy with your job? Do you plan on pursuing it forever? I'm not super happy with the exact job that I'm doing right now. I just wish it was a little bit different. That's always the case, though. I'm always just wanting something a little bit different, which is actually a problem. I can never just be happy 100% where I'm at, but I think that's okay. You're always looking for something always bigger and better, I guess. But But I do think I'm going to be in this field forever. Like, I can't imagine going to any other field. It's just a matter of like having different job duties, working with different teams that I'd like to do. What advice do you have, or what should one expect going to an interview for an internship with their local DNR, Department of Natural Resources, I'm guessing? I would expect if it's a government internship, you're probably going to have a panel interview, meaning there's going to be a lot of people interviewing you all at once. So just be prepared for that because it can be very overwhelming for your first panel interview. They'll probably ask you questions about if you have any fieldwork experience. If you do not, a good answer to that is like talking about how you like the outdoors and how you're excited for the field. They're just trying to suss out whether or not you're going to be comfortable in the field, because fieldwork's a weird thing where you don't really know if you love it until you kind of do it. And a lot of people will go into the field for like a week and just hate it. Like, they're like, I hate being out in the elements. I'm getting bug bites. This is not the work for me, which is okay. But people who have never been in the field are a bit of a risk to employers because they don't know if you're going to be the one who hates it. So if you can talk about like how you love, backpacking or hiking or walking around your neighborhood in the forest, anything like that is going to help if you don't actually have fieldwork experience. How is traveling for your job? How far do you usually have to go? And is it difficult sometimes? I usually don't leave. Well, okay, my job right now, I don't really leave Western Canada. I used to do a bit more traveling, and I've also taken contract positions on other continents, but right now I want to stay in Western Canada at least. So, yeah, it can be hard when things are back to back and I don't get much time at home. It's just really, really exhausting. And I'm sometimes just like, I want to be home in my own bed and just not have to worry about all the demands of the field. It can be really stressful. I mean, working 80-hour weeks sometimes, like I don't work those kind of hours anymore, but when I used to, is absolutely exhausting in the same way that any other job is going to be exhausting. But this one, you're isolated from family. I'm making it sound bad, but I'm just talking about the bad stuff, Would you ever shave your head as a form of becoming more vegan and closer to the environment? I don't know how shaving my head would make me more vegan or close to the environment, but if it did, this hair would be gone. What do you think about GMO foods? Some people say that they're the devil. Some people say they're harmless. I'm not going to comment on that because I don't know. I've not done the research on that. I personally just buy whatever's local and try to do like organic and pesticide free. I don't do too much around GMOs or know that much about that stuff. Here's a good question. How do you handle it if someone pushes your ethics while at work? This is something I struggle with whenever I work, and it's a very difficult thing to handle politely. All right, that is a great question. So it's hard because I see junior scientists get pushed around a lot because they think they need to do whatever their employer tells them to, and that's not true. It can be a really, really hard situation when you need a job to survive and your job is telling you have to do one thing or another. But the best way to do it is to explain respectfully why you don't feel comfortable doing it. And you can even start off really indirect because maybe you're just misunderstanding. Like, let's see, an example, I guess, would be you're asked to go do a survey for an animal that's currently would not even be in that area. So say you're being asked to do an amphibian breeding survey in winter and it's frozen and there's not going to be any amphibians. And so if you did the breeding survey and found no breeding amphibians and then they decide to bulldoze the pond because you said there was no amphibians there, then that would be unethical, right? Because you didn't take the survey at the right time of the year to assess what you're assessing. So maybe the employer just doesn't know that it's the wrong time. So I usually start off by explaining why this might not be appropriate. And then usually most of the time that will change their mind, especially if you throw in like some comments about professional integrity. They're usually not going to force you to do it. If they do try to really, really push it, you might have to just put your foot down and just say I don't feel comfortable doing that. I don't have all the right information, but try to work with them a bit because they might just not, they might just be feeling the pressure from someone else. So, but you still do have to stand your ground. You're a scientist. You have to push back sometimes. Okay. Okay, I'm going to try to answer these a bit quicker because I'm getting a lot of questions now. Non-existent, what would you recommend? I would recommend going to more of an ecology route if you don't have much wildlife work, because ecology is more broad, and it also covers like the realm of environmental science. So there's much more job opportunities in that, and you can also do wildlife too if those opportunities do pop up. But ecology is going to make sure you get more of a job where you live. How do you feel about people keeping common pets, not like cats and dogs, but more like bearded dragons? Mixed feelings personally. Could potentially hurt animal populations. That one really depends on the species. Exotic animals, some species can be taken, the animals themselves can be taken from not great breeders, not great sources. Some are even taken from the wild. I definitely do not support that. It's a bit more of a gray area when it comes to animals that might be bred ethically. You know, if you can really say breeding animals is ethical. It's a bit more of a gray area, especially for the animals that need like quite large habitats to be happy. I do think that that's not something I'm a huge fan of, is keeping an animal that's really meant to be in this big area into a small place. You know, I say that, but I have a cat too, and I'm sure my cat would love to be out in nature, but you know, I didn't buy him from a breeder, and that's just the way it is. You know, he just can't go out in the wild and kill a bunch of birds. So that's tough. I think humans have a weird relationship with pets, where a lot of having a pet is around having the power to like take a wild animal and capture it and put it in your own house. And there's a bit of a weird power imbalance there that like makes me very deeply uncomfortable, because it does feel like exploitation a little bit. But I have a pet, so it's a bit of a gray area for sure. That's a really good question. Oh my god. Okay, sorry for the lighting here. I think it'll get better. I've done field work mapping habitats based on vegetation in Lithuania, but if I'm all alone in the woods for days, I kind of start losing it, but I self-medicate with alcohol. Is that bad? Only you can answer if that's bad or not, but the way I'm reading that question maybe is like you already think that that's not great for you. Yeah, that you can definitely be alone. If you are scared to be alone, I guess alone in the woods for days and days can be scary to anyone, but like I would look at like maybe getting some therapy and seeing if there's an underlying cause for that. Our professor says that okay, this is just back on the question of where we form our ethics on. It comes from why we believe we are on Earth and and if we have an obligation to the Earth. That's a good question. And what gives us the obligation to the Earth? Ooh, that's a really deep question. So the question is, why are we obligated to help the Earth or be responsible to the Earth? We are a part of the system. You know, humans are not removed from the animal kingdom and from the environment. We are a part of the system, and the system benefits us just as much as it benefits any other animals. We need a home to live in. You know, we need food to eat. We need our pollinators. We need this to survive. So we have an obligation to protect that because we will die without it. That's the simple answer. Okay. Ooh, I go to a religious institution, and I know you've said you're not religious. Where would you say greater morals and science come from? I don't think you need religion to have a strong set of personal values and morals. I think that morals and values are a bit shaped of where you come from and what your lived experience is and how you want to be treated by other people. So I'd say that's where a lot of my values come from, is just trying to do the least amount of harm as possible so that my presence only helps and doesn't actively hurt the environment or other people. That's probably where my value system comes from, independent of like a higher being. We're getting deep. um, Wanted to become a wildlife biologist, but I remember you said salary was almost minimum wage. So you went on and off. Yeah, just to elaborate on that, it's usually minimum wage when you start. It's not always minimum wage. I've said, someone asked me, and so I'm also going to try to answer some of these questions in my community section. And someone asked me how much money I make, and I've said this in many videos. I make $73,000 a year, so that's not minimum wage. But I did start off at minimum wage, so it starts there and then it changes, and that's Canadian, not US. Okay. Are you afraid of Lyme disease and tick encephalitis? I've been bitten by so many black-legged ticks in my life. Like, I got 2 or 3 black-legged tick, which is the one that carries Lyme disease, bites like a few months ago when I was home in California, and I feel like I need to be a bit more careful about that. I'm very not afraid of it, which is not what I recommend. I recommend you stay on top of that. Is it possible to do wildlife biologist work while drinking? Not during work. No, that is a big no-no. But I'm having a drink right now. But I am very responsible about my drinking. I almost never really drink, to be honest. Everyone's personal limits are their own. Okay, I'm going to answer some questions quickly from the people who asked me on my community tab question. What's political opinion? Some of these are about ethics, some are not. Someone asked my opinion on Bernie Sanders. I voted for Bernie Sanders, so that's my opinion. I endorse him if anyone cares about my endorsement. Okay, what else do I have? How much do you use chemistry as a wildlife biologist? So the way that I use chemistry is I do a lot of lab testing. So like we get analytical data run on water quality, soils, sediment, and animal tissue, and that is to figure out habitat suitability for certain areas and to also see if any wildlife tissue is contaminated with certain contaminants like PCBs for orcas. It depends on the animal. So I do have to be able to take those lab reports and understand them, but it's less so much about the chemistry processes, more so as it is like interpreting what it would mean to have an excess of sodium in the water for a certain animal and to understand how that changes their environment. So it's less about the actual I don't really remember that much about like the different systems of chemistry. But some people do more of that. Like if you are doing certain types of wildlife work, you'll do more chemistry than others. But if you are just doing bad in your chemistry class, I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's not like you're going to have a lot of other opportunities to learn chemistry too. Okay. Just gonna, someone asked what my opinion is on Blackfish, the documentary. Someone says, I think it's kind of biased against SeaWorld. I watched it, but I'm not sure if it's accurate because SeaWorld also does a lot of conservation. I just read John Hargrove's book called, oh shoot, I don't remember what it's called. If you search his name, you can find it, but it's about, he's the orca trainer that was like the whistleblower from SeaWorld, and I think he has no reason to lie about what's happened. There's photo proof of what's happened in SeaWorld. And while someone can do a lot of great conservation, if on the other hand, they are forcibly breeding wildlife in cruel ways and keeping them in cruel conditions, all the good that you do isn't going to outweigh the evil that you do too. So I think that's something to remember. I like the documentary. I think it's good. Okay, I'm going to answer one more from the community tab, then I'm going to answer some of your guys who are on the lives questions. Oh, what are your thoughts on experiments or studies involving animals? What if the intent is to protect the species slash their habitat, such as bird banding? Um, yeah, so every experiment is different. Some are very animal testing. A lot of times is very cruel and unethical. But something like bird banding, where the impact is very minimal, it doesn't hurt. It might scare a little bit, and there is some impact to it, but it tells us so much about the animal and its habitat and its environment and its migration that the little tiny bit of disturbance is worth it in the general scheme of things. That's kind of a dangerous slope to go down, though, because I guess you could argue animal testing is worth it if it saves human lives. I don't know if I agree with that, but I think minimizing the disturbance as much as absolutely possible and simultaneously maximizing the amount of information that we're getting from that animal is best, because we are having an impact on animals as wildlife biologists. There is, unfortunately, an impact to animals. It's just about minimizing that as much as possible, but maximizing our learnings. Okay, looking at the chat now for some questions. Oh, someone asked a really similar one. Do you think it's ethical to radio color tag animals for research purposes, and at what point does it become unethical? That's a really similar question. I think there is no black and white in ethics. I think it becomes unethical when the pain that's being done to the animal is extended, like versus one quick radio tag and they're pretty much off and fine, versus, oh, well, now you're holding it to take a bunch of selfies, and I could talk more about that later. And, you're laughing and videotaping and like this. Meanwhile, the animal is like, bleeding and has a tag half hanging out of it. There's a big spectrum of like potentially unethical situations within an overall pretty ethical practice. But here's an important thing is there is a lot of people who are studying animal ethics in wildlife biology, and there's a lot of people who just do the science without even thinking about the animal ethics. And I think there's more people who kind of just go for it in the name of science, and way more needs to be done on actually studying the impact these devices have on animals. So before you radio collar something, you should already be confident that it's not going to significantly decrease like foraging success, breeding success of the animal, of having this tag attached to it. You should have already done as much research as you possibly can on that before you undergo a large research campaign where you're doing that to the animal. If you have not done the research to show and to prove that it's ethical, you should not be doing it. And not everyone does that. A lot of people just do things without properly researching the ethics behind it. So I think if we just consider animals more and their livelihoods and their health more than we do our data, that's going to totally change the world of wildlife biology so much. But that's not being done by everyone. But it is shifting. The atmosphere is shifting within this field. But it's taking a lot of people who are standing up and saying, like, this is unethical for it to happen, and for that research to get funded on animal ethics. Good question. I've heard about how the further you get up in the field, the more political it tends to get. Have you experienced this in your work? Absolutely. It's incredibly hard. It's hard to be a scientist and also be working within the world of different political climates. So that absolutely has something to do with it. And it's a really frustrating part of it, especially if you're more of a specialist, more of a technical person, and now you're going to have to make decisions about policy. Like, that goes beyond like my ability level, nor something I feel comfortable with. But there's definitely much more politics as you move up in the field, especially if you're going into government. Oh, I know you studied ESIS at UCSD. Would you ever have chosen to go to UCSB or UCD? And do you wish to go to grad school? I would have loved to go to UCSB or UC Davis. Those are both great schools. I was in San Diego for more of just like that was where my life took me. And so I found somewhere in San Diego. There wasn't one, like school did not bring me to San Diego. So I could have easily loved to go to UC Davis or UCSB. Probably UCSB because that was closer to my hometown, and Santa Barbara is such a beautiful area. Is a physics class in high school or university important, necessary to become a wildlife biologist? Usually for ecology wildlife degrees, you have to do physics. I've never heard of a program where you do no physics. So at some point, you're just going to have to do it because that's part of your curriculum. High school is, if you need it to get into university, do it. But if it's not needed, then you can do it in university. I don't use a ton of physics, but I definitely do touch on it occasionally. Okay. What is the importance of policy in your job? Taking a class on natural resource policy, and it's one of my favorite classes, but I don't know how applicable it is for wildlife biology. So if you're a wildlife biologist working for the government or making policy recommendations to the government, it's going to be totally relevant. So for example, say you're working in a nonprofit organization and you are a wildlife biologist with them, and you are studying the impact that logging has on bear dens, and you find that at 300 meters and below, bears are very agitated, and now you want to actually do something with that information, and you want to recommend that no logging can be done within 300 meters of a bear den. Now you are making a policy recommendation, and so that's how it plays in. So it's more of the applied ecology side. So if you look up stuff about applied ecology, you're going to see a lot of stuff about policy, and so that's kind of where it plays in. And I love doing that. I love actually taking the science and making a recommendation, not dictating policy, but a recommendation on how the science can be incorporated in the real world. Have you heard of any feedback about the environmental programs at UVic or Royal Roads? UVic has great environmental programs. I don't know anything about Royal Roads. Not good or bad. I just don't know anything about them. I would say UVic probably would have a better reputation, I think, around here. I don't really know what I'm talking about. I've only been working in Victoria for like 2 years, but I've heard good things about UVic. Okay, I'm going to, I'll answer one more. If the degree title is Bachelor of Science in Conservation Biology, does the major title matter? For example, majoring in human dimensions of conservation biology versus rangeland versus land rec. It can, if it totally... I guess it depends how you add it to your resume and what your degree says. If your degree says master or bachelor's in conservation, conservation biology, you can choose to leave off the human dimensions of it if you want and just say on your resume bachelor's of conservation biology. So it doesn't matter too much as long as it's about what your degree says on it, I guess, and how you sell that to employers, basically. Okay, actually, one of the questions in here was the same one I had in my community tab that I am going to answer because you have gone through the effort of asking it twice. So, should humans limit their hunger for meat to stop animals losing their habitats? And should this choice to eat meat be controlled? So those are 2 questions. One, I think humans should stop doing a lot of things that are harmful to animals. I absolutely think if reducing your meat intake helps animals in the environment, which it does, people should totally try to do it as much as they can. I don't think in any way anyone should be forced to eat something that they don't want to eat. That it goes so far beyond the ethical boundaries of government that I don't think at this point anyone should be forced to. But if market dictates that, say in 100 years, no one eats meat because it caused environmental changes that people weren't comfortable with, and the meat producers are subject to policies that limit their business, I think that's okay. But I don't think in any way someone should say, oh yeah, all meat is now banned. It's just thinking about things. How can we benefit the environment as much as possible while not limiting the freedom of people to choose, you know? And so I guess another question you could ask is, well, what if people want the freedom to eat dog meat? Or they want the freedom to eat wild animals, when in some countries wild animal meat is banned. That's where personal freedoms are reduced and the livelihood of the planet is more important than personal freedoms. So that's why many countries are choosing to ban wildlife as food, especially when we're getting all these diseases from it. So it's a fine line. That's actually a really good question, because you can argue, well, if we ban beef, that's infringing on people's personal freedoms, but then why is banning bats okay, you know? That's a rhetorical question. There are many reasons why we should not eat bats, but it's something to think about. Okay. I'm interested in wildlife photography as well. Thinking about doing that while on the job. Is that a good idea, or should I keep it separate? Depends on your employer. When I was working in the field a few years ago, I was working with an ornithologist that loved taking photos of wildlife. He ran it by the my boss, and she said it's fine as long as there's no identifying features in it. Because if you're being paid, say you're a consultant and you're being paid to work on like a private piece of property and you're taking photos for your own personal benefit on that private property, that might not be the best thing if it's not approved, versus if you're working in a nonprofit and you want to capture the beautiful wildlife that you work with and you're trying to protect, that's probably going to be fine. Your employer's probably going to say yes. So it depends who you work for. Generally, I try to keep that stuff as separate as possible. I'm saying that even though I sometimes bring in my job on my YouTube channel, but generally it's easiest if you just keep it separate, but many employers don't care. Okay, let me answer some more from my community post. Already answered thoughts about zoos. Oh, someone's asking about future job security in the United States, considering all of the environmental regulations being removed right now. I think the United States has a very volatile job market for wildlife biology. When you have someone in power who is anti-environmental regulation, you're going to naturally have less environmental jobs, and it sucks. But I don't think that could happen forever. Even if we totally destroy our planet, we still need people to clean up the mess, work in spills and stuff like that. So there's always going to be some sort of environmental job, but I think there's going to be less of the fun helping save the planet stuff and more of the cleaning up people's mess if environmental policies are reduced. Good question, Brandon Butterfield. Let me see if I've answered most of these yet. Do you think that by making a nature reserve or any of that sort of protected area is the answer for conservation? Do you think environmental conservation can go hand in hand with development? That's similar to the question. Well, actually, no, I haven't really answered that question. And that was something I thought about a lot when I was working more in industry. I think development can be more responsible. I think there are ways of rooting around environmentally sensitive areas, creating projects. Like if you are going to develop an area, picking the already most disturbed area, like a farmer's field, to build your new gas station versus a pristine piece of habitat. There's absolutely ways to develop, because we, in some ways, need these systems to continue our current society. We need to have these gas stations and we need to have these grocery stores being built on our land right now. So if we pick opportunities that are more ethical to the environment from picking areas that are already damaged, that could be a better choice than picking like pristine habitat. So there are definitely ways to manage development. But I think if we are already damaging so much habitat, it does need to be conserved. I think we do need to have a bit more of a hands-on approach, and I am going to talk about that more in an upcoming video where I talk about rewilding with the two other biologists that were in one of my last videos, and whether or not we should have more of a hands-on approach or a hands-off approach. So keep an eye out for that video. Hunting is used as a management strategy for some species such as deer and invasive wild hogs. What would be an alternative to killing in management practices? So, one of the big ones coming out right now, big awesome technology, is birth control for wildlife. That is one of the most emerging things that I'm starting to follow more. So they did it, I think it was around here, it was at least in BC. They gave deer birth control shots, like long-term birth control, so that they could reduce the deer population without having to actually kill the deer. And I think that can be a sustainable thing. In some ways, I guess you could say like forced sterilization of something without its consent is absolutely unethical. But when the alternative is death, it is a better choice. Man, I'm going through all these like ethical questions here today, which is exactly what I wanted to do, but it's hard. Um, we've already screwed up this planet so much. We've introduced these invasive species where they were never supposed to go. We've spilled things that have been held within this earth so far deep that no animals would have ever gotten it, like oil, and we've taken it out, forcibly extract it, and spilled it all over the surface of the earth. And the earth has no natural defense for many of these things because for thousands and thousands of years before our current time, it never had to deal with these issues. So, in some ways, we do have to try to do the best we can to mitigate for the mistakes we've already made. In an ideal world, we wouldn't have to control invasive species if people aren't bringing them in from all around the world. If globalization wasn't a thing, we would have less invasive species, less carbon emissions from travel. But we are here where we are now, and we have to do the best we can in an ethical manner to clean up our own mistakes. So, whew, getting deep here. Okay, let me just make sure I didn't miss any questions on here. Okay. If you guys have any more questions, ask them in the chat box. I'm going to probably go for another 5 minutes while I finish my drink. Okay, I think I answered all of them in here. I'm kind of skipping around in the chat box and answering the ones that I have a good answer for. If I'm not answering them, it's because I don't really know the answer. What about, oh, here's a good one. What about invasive species such as camels in Australia? Should we kill them all? Is it ethical to do that? Is it ethical to let them destroy the local ecology? That's a really hard question because personally, I would not want to participate in the killing of any animal. That's against my ethics. So if I was asked to kill a bunch of camels, I personally would not do that. But whether or not it's a bad thing is one of those ethical gray areas because there are a lot of questions around the camels because to be fair, I don't know a lot about this subject, but there are human benefits of killing animals sometimes. And that's something where it really has to be weighed. And I guess my answer to that would be, I don't think the loss of any animal life should ever be taken without thinking long and hard about it, thinking about the ramifications, what's going to happen, if it's even going to help, if it's sound science. Should be the absolute last thing that you do is to take the life of an animal. Every other option should already be exhausted at that point. So in some situations, every other option is exhausted, and that's the only thing that is left to do. And so an animal life shouldn't be taken lightly, but that doesn't mean that there are some situations where unfortunately it's the best thing that we can do because this planet is out of balance. And something like an introduced species that, as I was talking about before, never should have been there to begin with. It's sad. And I feel like I'm saying it's okay to kill animals. But I also don't want to say there's no situations where the death of an animal is okay, because that's not true either. Yeah, it's a lot to think about. Hopefully I'm giving some sort of a answer that's making sense. How do you feel about environmentalists that protest fracking when they themselves drive the demand for oil by driving cars? That's a good question. And that's something that comes up a lot as someone who self-identifies as an environmentalist. So the system that we work in today does not allow you to be zero emission. We do not have the level of affordability of us all having, electric cars, and the electricity is powered by solar panels, and the solar panels are made from flowers and love. Like, it doesn't, we're all going to have impacts to the environment. But being as mindful as possible to reduce that is the best thing we can do right now. And so I've actually ran into this situation a lot. So I'll share a story that doesn't paint me in the best light, but for the sake of honesty, I was going to do a bird survey in Alberta, and I had to drive a truck to get to the site because it was really off-road. There was no way to access it with a car. So here I was driving this big gas-guzzling truck, and I hit a freaking bird, and it died. It was like, I stopped my truck, and I got out, and I saw this dead bird, and I was like, why am I even here? Like, this is such a waste. But what I told myself, at least, was I was traveling to do this bird survey that informed a pipeline project that could potentially stop the deaths by stopping and rerouting the pipeline around the sensitive habitat. It could have stopped the deaths of so many more birds. So it's about the net balance. If you were an environmentalist such as Bill McKibben or something, someone who travels all around the world, and he takes a flight to London but inspires 1 million people to stop using plastic straws and to cut their carbon emissions, the net benefit of him undertaking the carbon emissions is still positive because he was able to help so many people reduce their carbon emissions. So that's a bit of the reasoning of why I think prominent environmental activists still are using fossil fuels. Oh, do you know what falconry is? I know what it is, and I don't really have any experience with it. A few of my colleagues do that type of stuff as a hobby for, like, there's a birds of prey sanctuary, I think, around here, but I don't really know too much about it myself. Okay. It's 2 a.m., Anthony's Wild Adventures, so you actually caught one of my live shows for a change. Thank you. I did answer my thoughts about the coronavirus earlier, and I have a video about it up on my channel on This Week in Ecology, so I share all my thoughts on that video. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up. I just want to thank you guys for tuning in, and really, I love this channel, and I love this community, and I love being able to answer questions in this format because, to be honest, lately I've been feeling like a little uninspired on my channel lately, just because my views have been way down. I don't know, less people have been tuning into my videos. I've been feeling a bit less inspired, just due to how busy work's been, how stressed I've been, and how I haven't really had the time and the space to get super creative with my videos. So I just want to say thank you for the people who are around and who are watching my videos, and even the people who watch all the videos and stuff they're not interested in and comment and engage in the comment section, especially the people who've been buying me coffees on my coffee page, which is a donation to my channel. That stuff seriously keeps me going and doing this channel. And when you guys share stories about how I inspired you to study wildlife biology or environmental science, that is so cool. So I just want to express my thank you to that because it does mean a lot. Yeah, cool. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you have the best evening ever. I didn't even finish my one drink, but I'm getting hungry, so I'm going to make myself some dinner. And yeah, have a good evening, guys. Bye.